"You're not family anymore," my dad said, so I let the truth speak for me. My father built his empire with hands that shook the stock market. Lawson Global Industries wasn't just a company, it was our family's crown, and he wore it like a king who never planned to pass the throne. The first time a magazine called him the Iron CEO, I was 10. The second time, he framed it above the fireplace. People admired him, but living under his name was like breathing through glass. Everything was polished on the outside and sharp underneath. At family dinners, he'd quiz us about revenue and mergers, like other dads asked about grades. "You'll take over one day," he'd say to my older brother Nathan. Then his eyes would slide past me, the youngest, the soft one. "I wasn't made for boardrooms," he said. "I was too careful, too quiet, too forgettable." He didn't know that while Nathan chased speeches and headlines, I was buried in the systems that actually ran his empire. The servers, the audit trails, the internal reports, those were my territory. He thought silence meant weakness. But silence listens, and silence remembers. And one day, that silence would speak louder than any of his roaring boardroom commands. At 26, I worked as a data analyst for his company. Technically, I reported to the finance department, but most people didn't realize how much of their daily workflow I touched. Payroll, contracts, internal compliance. I built the framework that kept the numbers straight while my father played chess with headlines. He liked power. He could see new skyscrapers, luxury launches, cameras flashing at charity galas. I preferred power that stayed invisible, the kind that couldn't be undone once written in code. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pass by his office on my way out. The light was always on. I'd see him hunched over his desk, cigar smoke curling like secrets. Once, he looked up. "You're still here?" "Just closing a report," I said. He nodded, but didn't thank me. "That's what you're good at, finishing other people's work." He meant it as an insult, but he was wrong. I wasn't finishing others' work. I was cleaning their messes before the company collapsed under them. The numbers never lied, but my father did, and someday, those two things were going to collide. The breaking point came during the annual shareholder gala. Crystal chandeliers, violins, champagne that cost more than a month's rent. It was his world, not mine. Nathan stood on stage beside him, shaking hands with investors, basking in the applause. I sat near the back, where no one noticed. My badge didn't even list my last name. He'd made sure of that. Halfway through the evening, a journalist asked my father about the company's latest expansion. "We're growing stronger every quarter," he said proudly. "My eldest son, Nathan, has been instrumental." Someone else asked, "And your younger child?" My father paused, smiled thinly, and said into the microphone, "Oh, Alex? He's pursuing his own path, not really involved in the business." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I sat frozen, the sound crawling under my skin. I'd built the systems they used to pay for this very event. I knew every hidden ledger, every subsidiary, every quiet transfer. But to him, I was nobody. When I stood to leave, he caught my eye for just a second. There was no guilt there, only satisfaction. That was the night I stopped waiting for him to see me. 3 weeks later, I discovered the anomaly. A string of hidden transactions buried deep in the corporate accounts, millions routed through shell companies overseas. The signatures matched Nathan's department, but the authorization codes came from higher up, from my father's level. At first, I thought it was a system error. Then I saw the timing. The same week as his record profit announcement. He hadn't built those numbers, he'd faked them. He'd moved funds from dormant accounts to inflate quarterly growth. I sat there for hours, staring at the proof. The man the world called the Iron CEO had built his empire on deception. That night, I backed up the data to a private server, encrypted it, and labeled it for truth. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, when I tried to bring it up to him, he cut me off mid-sentence. "You don't understand how business works," he said, voice cold. "You don't have the stomach for power." Maybe not, but I had something stronger evidence, and evidence never stays silent forever. The confrontation happened in his office, a glass box overlooking the city he thought he owned. I still remember how the skyline gleamed behind him, tall and arrogant, just like he was. "I found something," I said, setting the folder on his desk. He didn't look up. "If this is about Nathan's promotion, save it. It's about you," I said quietly. "About offshore accounts and forged profit reports." That got his attention. He froze, then slowly raised his eyes to mine. "You're accusing your own father? I'm showing you the truth." He opened the folder, skimmed a page, then shut it hard enough to rattle the pens. "You think you're saving the company? You're destroying it. I'm saving what's real." He stood, voice rising. "You're not family anymore." The words hit harder than any blow. Years of silence, all turned into a sentence that stripped my name away. I walked out without replying, but my hands were steady, because for the first time, I realized something he couldn't erase what I'd built, and one day, when everything he'd hidden came crashing down, my work would be the only thing still standing. After that meeting, my badge stopped working. Security didn't even meet my eyes when I tried to swipe in the next morning. "Access revoked," the reader flashed. It felt strange years of loyalty, erased by a single line of code. I walked out carrying only a box, a mug, a flash drive, and a photo of my team. My phone buzzed with a short message from HR. "Your position has been terminated at the direction of the board." The board, meaning him. Mom called that night, her voice trembling. "Your father said you resigned." I almost laughed. "Is that what he told you?" He said, "You betrayed the company." I didn't answer. Betrayal was a word he used whenever someone told him a truth he didn't like. For the first time in my life, I slept without checking the company servers, but I couldn't rest. My mind replayed the documents, the signatures, the fake accounts. Somewhere, deep down, I knew those numbers would surface again. They always did, and when they did, I'd be ready. Unemployment came with a strange kind of freedom. I rented a small apartment across town and started consulting for smaller tech firms. They paid less, but every client treated me with more respect than my own father ever had. Still, I kept one secret project running, for truth, the encrypted folder containing every piece of evidence I'd found. Every few weeks, I updated it, quietly tracking new transactions. He'd grown bolder, moving bigger sums, trusting fewer people. Sometimes I thought about confronting him again. But confrontation was his language, not mine. Mine was patience and proof. One evening, a former coworker reached out. "Alex, strange things are happening in accounting. Budgets don't add up. Something big's coming." That night, I checked my data feeds. What I saw made my pulse spike. Multiple shell accounts, draining funds from corporate pensions. If the pattern continued, thousands of employees would lose everything. He hadn't just crossed a line. He'd set it on fire. The scandal broke 6 weeks later. A journalist from Financial Ledger Weekly published a headline that shook the markets. "Lawson Global accused of massive accounting fraud." I read it twice, hardly breathing. The article cited anonymous internal sources, leaked spreadsheets, and offshore audits. The evidence matched my files exactly. Someone had found my trail. Within hours, the company's stock plummeted. Reporters camped outside headquarters. Investors demanded statements. Nathan appeared on television, his voice trembling. "Our father built this company on honesty," he said. "We will prove these accusations false." But I knew he couldn't. The numbers wouldn't lie. When Mom called again, she was crying. "He's in the hospital," she said. "Chest pains. They think it's his heart." For a moment, every ounce of anger I'd stored turned to fear. He was still my father, after all. I packed a bag and drove through the night. I didn't know if he'd want to see me, but truth wasn't done speaking yet. Hospitals have a smell, sterile, quiet, humbling. When I entered his room, monitors beeped softly. He looked smaller, older. The man who once filled boardrooms now seemed lost in a sea of white sheets. He opened his eyes. "You came." I nodded. Mom called. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Finally," he said, "they're tearing the company apart. Lawyers, auditors, they want blood." I swallowed. "You could tell them the truth." His eyes hardened. "The truth would destroy us. It's already doing that." He turned away. "You think you know everything. You don't understand what it takes to lead." Maybe not. But I understood what it meant to protect people who trusted you. "Before I left," he said, barely above a whisper, "you should have stayed out of it." I looked back at him. I tried, but the truth didn't. The board suspended him a week later. Investigations widened, freezing assets and locking down accounts. For the first time in decades, Lawson Global had no CEO. Reporters hounded Nathan for answers. He kept insisting I was the one who leaked the data. He wanted revenge, he said on camera. He's not family anymore. Is rolling. Hearing my own brother repeat our father's words should have hurt, but it didn't. It confirmed how deep the blindness ran. Then, one morning, I got a call from the Federal Audit Division. "Mr. Lawson," an agent said, "we believe you have information that could help us." I hesitated. "If I cooperate, what happens to him?" "That depends on what the evidence shows," she replied. I opened for truth one last time. The files were ready, dates, accounts, authorization codes, everything. For years, he'd told me silence was weakness, but I'd learned silence can hold power if you know when to break it. And now, it was time. Meeting the investigators felt like walking into a storm I'd helped predict. Their conference room was cold and bright, filled with laptops and files marked confidential. Agent Rivera, a calm woman with sharp eyes, slid a folder toward me. "You worked on internal systems for Lawson Global," she said. "We believe you have access no one else does." I nodded. "I do. I also have something else." I handed her a flash drive, the complete archive of For Truth. Her team got to work immediately. Lines of data filled their screens, scrolling faster than I could follow. When one investigator looked up, his expression shifted from doubt to awe. "These records are exact matches," he said. "Every transfer, every forgery." Rivera leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson, this evidence doesn't just prove misconduct. It shows who tried to cover it." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your father approved every code." For a long moment, I said nothing. Hearing it out loud was different. It turned numbers into something human. Rivera spoke gently. "You just saved thousands of jobs. Maybe. But I'd also destroyed what little family I had left." The media went wild. Lawson Empire under federal investigation. Every news ticker screamed his name in red. Photos of my father leaving court appeared beside old magazine covers of him shaking hands with presidents. Mom called every night, her voice cracking. "He's furious, Alex. Says you betrayed him to the government." "I didn't betray him," I said. "I told the truth. That's not how he sees it." I stared out my window at the skyline he once ruled. It doesn't matter how he sees it anymore. Still, guilt lingered. I hadn't wanted to break him. I'd wanted to stop him from breaking others. Then one morning, I received an official letter from the Department of Justice. "Your testimony has led to the protection of pension funds and the recovery of misallocated assets. Thank you for your cooperation." The same week, My father was indicted for securities fraud. Nathan refused to speak to me. My mother stopped answering texts. The house I'd grown up in, the place where legacy had meant everything, went silent. And somehow, in that silence, I began to breathe freely for the first time. Months passed. Investigations became trials. Trials became headlines, and my father's empire crumbled piece by piece. Factories closed, contracts dissolved, and people who had once bowed to him began rewriting history to save themselves. I stayed quiet, out of sight, working again as a data consultant. But the truth has a strange way of growing legs. It travels even when you don't move. One afternoon, I got a call from a familiar number. It was Agent Rivera. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "the board has requested to meet you privately, off the record." I hesitated. Why? They've realized who maintained their systems, the integrity reports, the safety audits, the checks that kept their departments running. You did that, not your father. When I arrived, the boardroom felt emptier than before. A few remaining members greeted me politely. One cleared his throat. "We wanted to thank you," he said. "Without your work, this company would have collapsed years ago." I looked around the polished table that used to feel like a cage. "It's ironic," I said softly. The quiet job no one valued turned out to be the only thing that worked. Despite everything, I went to see him. He was under house arrest by then, his mansion stripped of staff, the gates locked, reporters banned from the grounds. When he opened the door, he looked older, grayer. The man who once towered over everyone now moved slowly, shoulders bent. "Why are you here?" he asked flatly. "Because you're still my father," I said. He scoffed. "You came to gloat?" "No. To remind you that it didn't have to end like this." He stared past me, toward the city skyline. "You think you saved the company?" "I saved the people who worked for it," I said. "The ones you forgot about." He laughed once, bitter and short. "You took everything from me." "No," I said quietly. "You gave it away." For a long time, he didn't speak. Finally, he said, "You're just like your mother, always chasing righteousness." I'll take that as a compliment. Dad, when I left, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. But somewhere deep inside, I sensed that the truth hadn't finished speaking yet. The next turning point came unexpectedly. The federal court released a statement. Due to critical cooperation from internal sources, several charges against secondary parties are dropped, Lawson Global to be restructured under new leadership. The press focused on one line. The whistleblower will be recognized for their contribution to corporate reform. By evening, my inbox exploded. Messages from journalists, former employees, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them said the same thing: "Thank you." For the first time, my name wasn't connected to scandal. It was tied to survival. Later that week, Agent Rivera called again. "There's a ceremony at the Capitol next month," she said. "They're awarding you the Corporate Integrity Medal. I thought you should hear it from me." I almost laughed. "He's going to hate that." She smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll finally understand." I didn't know then how right she'd be, or how that ceremony would bring the world, and my father, to a silence that said everything words never could. The weeks before the ceremony felt unreal. Invitations poured in government officials, business leaders, reporters. I was told to prepare a short speech, though the idea of standing under bright lights made my stomach twist. Meanwhile, rumors spread about my father's condition. He wasn't eating much, rarely left his study, and refused all interview requests. Some said he was angry. Others said he was broken. I didn't know which to believe. But the night before the event, Mom called me for the first time in months. "He's watching, you know," she said quietly. "He won't admit it, but he's proud." I smiled faintly. "He doesn't have to admit it. I just want him to understand. The next morning, I dressed in a simple black suit and left early. The city was calm, the streets washed clean from a night of rain. As I walked toward the capital, a single thought stayed with me: truth doesn't shout, it waits. And today, it was finally going to be heard. The ceremony hall shimmered with light. Rows of cameras lined the back wall, and the air buzzed with the quiet hum of whispers and expectation. My name sat printed on a placard near the stage, right beside a silver medal resting in its case. Agent Rivera met me backstage. "You ready?" I laughed nervously. "Not really." She smiled. "Then you're probably the right person for this." When they called my name, the applause started polite, then grew. I walked to the podium, heartbeat thudding in my chest, faces blurred in the glare of stage lights. I started slowly. I didn't come here to expose anyone. I came here because sometimes silence lets damage grow too long, and when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't ask for permission. As I continued, the crowd grew quieter. I spoke about accountability, about how legacy means nothing without integrity. When I finished, there was no sound, just stillness. Then, one by one, people stood, the applause rolling like thunder through the hall. I had no idea who had started it, but somewhere, I hoped it was him. After the ceremony, reporters crowded around. Microphones, cameras, questions, it all blurred together. I gave short answers, nothing sensational. I didn't want fame. I wanted closure. That night, as I got home, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, just my name written in bold handwriting I knew instantly. My father's. Inside was a note. "You were right. The company was never mine. It was yours all along. I built the walls. You held the foundation. I see that now." For a long moment, I just stared at the words. He'd never apologized before. Not once. But this was his version of it. A week later, the news broke that he'd quietly transferred ownership of several patents and research divisions to a public trust my name listed as the administrator. The media called it a final act of redemption. But I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a bridge, a fragile one, but enough to cross. When I visited him again, months had passed. The house felt smaller, quieter. He sat by the window, sunlight spilling over his chair. "You got my letter," he said. "I did," he nodded. "They took everything. They took the illusion," I said. "Not everything." He chuckled weakly. "You sound like your mother. Maybe that's why I never fit in." He looked at me then, eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. "You did more than fit in. You outgrew us." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Outside, the wind rustled the garden, the same one Mom had planted decades ago. He reached into his pocket and handed me a worn company pin, the old Lawson crest. "If it ever means something again, make sure it's honest this time." I took it carefully. "I will," he smiled faintly. "Good. Then maybe you'll build something worth carrying the name." 3 months later, he passed quietly in his sleep. The news hit the headlines within hours. Frank Lawson, industrial icon, dies at 67. The funeral drew hundreds of executives, employees, even reporters who once criticized him. But the tone was different now. The empire he'd ruled no longer existed. What stood in its place was something humbler, cleaner, something real. I spoke last. Standing before the crowd, I said, "My father believed legacy was power. I used to think that too. But now I know legacy is truth, the part of you that can't be erased." The hall went completely still. Even the air felt heavy with it. Then, one by one, people rose to their feet, not for the man he had been, but for the lesson his story left behind. As I stepped down, I glanced at the front row. The empty seat where he would have sat seemed almost peaceful, and in that silence, I felt something lift, like the truth had finally been spoken, and it didn't need words anymore. In the months after the funeral, the house felt like a museum, quiet, filled with shadows of things that used to matter. But amid the silence, something began to stir. Letters started arriving from former employees, people who had worked under my father's rule. Most of them said the same thing. Thank you for fixing what we were too afraid to face. At first, I didn't know what to do with the gratitude. I'd spent years being invisible, and now the spotlight fell too bright. But when the state offered me the chance to rebuild the company under a new name, Lawson Integrity Group, I said yes. Not to restore the old empire, but to rebuild it on something it had never had before. Honesty. Mom came to visit during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She held my hand as the cameras flashed. He would have been proud, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Maybe not at first. No, she agreed. But he learned. You taught him. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't just survived his legacy. I had rewritten it. Running the new company felt different from anything I'd known. No marble floors, no private jets, no cold handshakes. Just people, engineers, analysts, developers building something meant to last. We specialized in compliance technology, the same tools that had exposed the fraud years before. Every file, every transaction, every decision was transparent. No shadows left to hide in. One afternoon, while walking through the office, I noticed a young intern staring at the old Lawson crest hanging near the entrance. What's that from? She asked. It's what came before, I said. A reminder. She nodded slowly. Of what? That even the strongest empires fall if they forget why they started. She smiled. Then this one's different. I hoped she was right, because now every honest choice felt like another brick laid in the foundation my father had never finished. Not a monument to power, but to truth. The years moved fast. Our software expanded across industries, finance, medicine, even government transparency projects. We became known not for dominance, but for reliability. Quiet success, the kind that didn't need a press release. One morning, I was invited to speak at an international ethics conference. I hesitated, remembering how much my father had loved microphones. But this wasn't about fame. It was about example. When I arrived, the hall was packed. Leaders from around the world sat waiting. I took a deep breath and began. My father once told me silence was weakness, I said. But silence can also be strength when it listens, when it learns, when it waits for the right moment to speak. The words rolled easily now. No fear, no anger, just truth. When I finished, the audience didn't clap right away. They just sat there, completely still. Then, slowly, they stood. The sound of their applause filled the hall like a heartbeat. And once again, a room full of power went silent for me. After the conference, a reporter followed me outside. You've rebuilt everything your father lost, she said. Do you ever think about him when you stand on these stages? All the time, I answered. He's the reason I'm here, even after what happened, especially after. She tilted her head. What would you say to him now? I thought for a moment. I'd tell him he was wrong about one thing. Legacy isn't about control. It's about continuity. It's what happens when the truth outlives you. That quote ended up on the front page of Business Today. But I didn't care about the coverage. I cared about the email I got the next day from Nathan. I watched your speech. You did what he couldn't. I'm proud of you. I sat staring at the screen for a long time. Then, for the first time in years, I replied, Thanks, brother. It's finally over. Years later, I stood alone in the rebuilt headquarters, looking out over the city lights. The skyline hadn't changed much, but everything else had. The company no longer carried my father's name, yet somehow, his spirit was still there, strong, flawed, human. On the wall behind me hung two framed photos, one of the original Lawson Global Tower, the other of our modest new office ribbon cutting. Beneath them, a plaque read, "Truth doesn't destroy legacy, it defines it." The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but earned. I turned off the lights and stood for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me. It was the same kind of silence that had followed me since the beginning, the silence of rooms that once dismissed me, now listening, and in that moment, I realized something simple and final. I hadn't just let the truth speak for me. I had become its voice.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe to Revenge with Avenix for more powerful stories like this.